I graduated from high school in Great Falls. I attended the University of Montana here in Missoula. I spent 1 year out of state at the University of Colorado in Boulder in 75, 76. Those were turbulent times down there. And then returned to Missoula, graduated here, and then went to law school here. Following law school, I spent 3 years prosecuting in the county attorney's office in Great Falls, and from there moved to Big Fork in 1983, where I've been in private practice ever since. One of the cases I handled in private practice a number of years ago was an adoption. It was my first interstate adoption, where the children came from a family out of the state of Colorado. The adoptive parents, who were the aunt and uncle by blood, were here in Montana. They were residents of Big Fork, friends, neighbors, and clients. And we could not get through the red tape of all of the administrative hassles between the state of Montana and the state of Colorado. And then all of a sudden I got this call from a retired lawyer, of all things, in Colorado, and he introduces himself as a CASA volunteer. And I said, "What's that?" And so he explained what a CASA volunteer was. And it is the same then as it is now. But for his assistance, the adoption would not have occurred. He was like the mechanic that could break past all of the red tape, talk to the judges, the lawyers, the clerk of court, the investigator, the social workers. He had a direct pipeline to all of those people, to the children, to the biological parents, and everybody else. And entirely because of his work, we eventually got it done. It still took a fair amount of time, but we eventually got it done. I never forgot that. And about 3 or 4 years following that, I saw a little notice in the newspaper in Kalispell that they were requesting people to sign up for training for a local CASA program. And I said, I got to do that. I said, the miracle that it worked in my case, I got to try and do that for somebody else. And so I wasn't in the very first class in Kalispell, I was in the second. And I have been with the program ever since. That was approximately 15 years ago. I was active in the program in Kalispell for approximately 10 years. I am still semi-active, inactive, because I took a little bit different course in my volunteer work, and I've been going through the chairs of the State Bar Association. That's been keeping me busy. So I'm not quite president yet. I'm president-elect this year, and this September I'll take over the big chair for a year, and then I am immediate past president for another year. So they get 3 years out of you, one way or the other. So that's keeping me pretty busy. But one of the things I've always loved to do is my undergraduate degree was in speech communication. And I have always enjoyed pulling forward some of those old principles into my day-to-day life, as well as my role as a CASA volunteer, use a little bit of what I know about the practice of law. That's my purpose in talking to you today. And we're going to touch on a lot of subjects, but my basic thrust of what I want to get across to you today is how to get organized. And everybody wants to. It's like everybody wants to have a spending plan or a budget, but actually forcing yourself to hold the knife to your wrist and let the blood out on the floor and sit down and actually do it. Most of us just have such a hard time doing that. So what I'm going to do is break it down into pieces for you and show you how easy it actually is. And once you see how easy it is, and once you try it, you will never do it another way ever again. The advantage that I had was I was part of some fairly complex litigation. Even though I'm a solo practitioner, I got swooped up into some fairly complex litigation a number of years ago involving lots of parties, lots of claims, lots of lawyers. And I actually had a mentor in that case who showed me how to organize a file. And so it was based upon that system. I went back to my office, and we didn't have the internet in those days. Everything was mail order or on the telephone. And so I ordered this software, and I ordered this set of notebooks, and I regret I meant to bring some with me because I want to hand them out to you because they're so nice to use. But I'll tell you about them. And so we're going to use a loose leaf notebook system and an outline. And I'm telling you, you can have your money back if you don't like it. Okay? So that's largely what we're going to do today. So, but I also want to make this a little bit of fun for you. And I like to keep it discussion oriented because I have never taught a class where I haven't learned more than I brought to the table. So if you folks have something you'd like to share, something you'd like to say, or if there's something that I say that just doesn't quite strike you as being correct or right, I'd like you to say something so that we can all talk about it. Because one of the benefits to being part of a CASA volunteer organization is there's more than enough problems around the table. We deal with tough issues, tough cases, highly emotional, usually train wrecks. And one of the things I remember is that sometimes the only encouraging thing I heard was that the next guy's case was worse than mine. And if I could hear him or her talk out loud about their case, sometimes I came up with some ideas they hadn't thought of. And if I talked out loud about my case, they would frequently suggest things that I hadn't thought of. Sometimes when you're in the forest, you can't see the trees. So let's all agree that I'm not the smartest guy in the room here. All I'm going to do is just share what my experience is. I'd like you to do the same so that we can all learn a little bit from each other. Is that fair? Good. Okay. Don't be embarrassed if you need to go get some water, go use a restroom, stretch your legs. You're not going to offend me, so just do what you need to do. Okay. Well, this is what I call a CASA's guide to case management, and that's basically what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about organizing your file, how to get started, gathering, sifting, and synthesizing your information and recommendations into a report to the court, because ultimately that's what we do. Now, yes, we advocate on behalf of children. Yes, we do. But ultimately, we're going to produce a product, and that product is a written report. And that written report gets submitted to a judge. Now, I'll bet it's true in your jurisdiction. I know it's true in my jurisdiction. When a case comes up for a hearing and a judge comes into the bench and he sits down and he has a stack of files this thick and the individual files are this thick, guess what he reads first before he ever listens to any of the testimony? What do you think? The CASA report. Why?
Because we do the work for him.
It's the abbreviated version of everything that's going on.
It's an abbreviated version of everything that's going on. The other comment was, because we do the work. Those are both correct answers. What's the other reason?
The CASA doesn't have a bias.
Bingo. We don't have an agenda. Everybody else that appears in court that has filed pleadings is arguing on behalf of winning, losing, gaining, getting something out of the deal. We're the only ones there that don't have an agenda, other than to make sure that the child's best interests are first and foremost. That's what the hearing's all about. Okay? The other reason is because your report, which is what? 3, 4, maybe 5 pages, right around in there, it's the shortest document in the file. Okay? And on top of a stack of documents that are that thick and this many files, guess what the judge knows about that case when he walks into that courtroom? Goose egg. Not very darn much. So if the judge has 2 or 3 minutes to familiarize himself with the case, guess what he's going to read? An objective report, a well-written report, a report that summarizes everything, and a report that's accurate and based upon direct observation on behalf of the children. Bingo. Okay? So that puts a lot of burden on us, doesn't it? It means that the report that we submit needs to be pretty darn good. Okay? It doesn't mean we need to be great writers. What it means is it just needs to be well synthesized, well organized, and well spoken. Okay? So if that's the end product, what I'm going to do is try and convince you that that begins at the beginning. The quality of the end product depends directly upon how you started at the beginning. So we have a choice. We can put it together in a logical and organized format from day one, or we can have the classic paper bag. Our report's due in 2 weeks, and we have a pile and a stack of papers, and you start pulling them out and go, okay, now what do I do? Ugh. And it's Panic City. The CASA's role is pretty unique because we have to work within a framework involving a lot of different interests and a lot of different people. So we're working with kids, we're working with other CASA, we're working with social workers, we're working with the courts and the judicial system. We have a lot of players that we have to interview and communicate and work with. A lot of children, a lot of places, a lot of faces. Okay? You're going to communicate with all of these people. They're all involved in the case. I like this slide. It says, I made a list of 100 things I need to do this week and numbered them in order of importance. Unfortunately, 99 of them are marked number 1. Okay? Well, that's not the way we prioritize. You can't sit down with your jot list and say, well, it's all important. So that's what we're going to work on today. Okay? So what I like to say is don't be a baboon. Take the time, do your homework, because if you have better records up front, then you're going to have a better report on the tail end. It's going to be easier to stay current in your case because you're not going to forget where you left off. Because your notebook is going to contain some notes of exactly what the last thing that you did was, what the thing you did before that was, and you made a note to yourself about what you need to do next. So what's nice about that is the case doesn't get cold on you. One of the big difficulties we have in the practice of law is we say just that. The case gets cold. If you don't work on a case for 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 weeks and it goes back in the file drawer, guess what? You don't want to take it out again because you know it's going to take you an hour of downtime just to read the file to figure out where it was you left off, and then you can start work on the file. Well, guess what? I can't bill my client for a dead hour just reading what I did before. So what do? I don't read the file at all. I just leave it in the file cabinet. Okay? Guess what? We're all like that. Okay? And if we don't keep our files clean and organized, then we don't want to look at them either. And we forget what our agenda is and what we're supposed to do. So it'll be easier to stay current. You'll know where to store papers and records. And that's the next thing, because when you first get involved in a CASA case, it's like drinking from the fire hose, isn't it? Everything's coming in all at once. And you got all these papers. And if you don't put them in the right place right away, you lose them. You can't remember where they are. How many of us have faced the situation where you're synthesizing your report and you just know, God, I got a note about this from somewhere. I talked to this person. I've got an email from this guy. I got this letter. I got this medical report. And you can't find it. You know you got it. You can't find it. And how many of us have said, all right, I give up. I lost it. I have to bite the bullet and call so-and-so and get another copy. How embarrassing. It's not just embarrassing and humiliating. It takes time. And because you don't want to do that, you put that off. We're human. So here's a way to avoid that, because you're going to have the right place to put that document as soon as it arrives, and it's never going to get lost on you. Never. And that's the way to organize these cases. Okay? You'll be able to know where you store papers and records, and you'll be able to find them when you start to synthesize your report. Well, I like to begin at the beginning. Your procedures, I'm sure, vary a little bit from what we do elsewhere around Montana, in particular in the Flathead. But what we typically do is we start with what's called a director's briefing. And in other words, the director will call a volunteer and say, Randy, I think I have a case for you. It's roughly about this. Do you have any conflicts of interest? No. Let's get together and meet and discuss it. And so we will. I'll stop in the CASA office, and we have just an informal chat that might last 10 or 15 minutes about the basic background and facts of the case to see if it's a fit. Not all cases are a fit for all volunteers. Some volunteers have strengths in other areas, weakness in other areas, and a smart director is going to want to make sure that a case is kind of finely tuned for a particular volunteer. Now, that doesn't mean there's a volunteer for every case. There's more cases than there are volunteers. There's more dependent neglect and abuse than there are CASA volunteers who are going to fix all of that. So I don't pretend that there is a classic volunteer for every case. I don't. But there are some cases that the facts of the case may be such that you just emotionally, physically are not able to deal with. There might be another volunteer who is more capable of it. We have all kinds of retired folks in the CalSpell volunteer program from all walks of life. Teachers, engineers, physicians, retired lawyers. Isn't it nice when the director can pull in a volunteer with a medical background on a case that has lots of medical records, lots of medical issues? I tend to get involved in those where there are more intensive legal issues because I can wind my way through that. There have been rare occasions where the CASA took a position in disagreement with the caseworker. And we actually went to hearing on those cases. Those cases I typically become involved in because I can stand up in the courtroom and not be intimidated. So it just depends. So we start with the director's briefing. Okay, we go from there, and you're going, assuming that you accept the appointment and that you're appointed to the case, you're going to start receiving what we call in legal circles pleadings. Pleadings are the documents that are filed with the court. Okay, so that's going to be the petition. It's going to be an affidavit in support typically of temporary emergency custody, temporary legal custody, probably a short summary affidavit of the caseworker as to why it's all necessary, and then there's going to be an order appointing you. Okay, that's all you're going to get to start with. Okay, and from there, that's what you're going to use to start building your organizational notebook.
You know, you might want to describe what digesting means.
Sure.
Because it says read and digest the pleadings.
Mm-hmm.
And every pleading will have a case caption on it. So it'll be really obvious it's from the court. Okay.
When I say a pleading, I don't just mean a document filed with the court. I mean a document that has what's called a court caption. It says, in re the matter of so-and-so, a dependent neglected youth. Okay? And then it has a case number DN-06-XXX. Okay? Years ago, they used to, if there were multiple children, they would put all the kids into a single DN file. They've since changed that policy statewide. Now there's a separate DN case for every kid, so it becomes rather document intensive. Okay? So you want to read those documents. Some of it's going to be in legal gobbledygook. Don't worry about that. Just worry about the facts. What are the facts? That's what I mean when I say digest it. So you will already have your briefing with your director and a few early notes from that. So you want to read the complaint, the petition, understand what's being said, understand what the basic facts of the case is. Affidavit. An affidavit is simply a sworn statement that is used to support the allegations that are in the petition. That's all it is. It's sufficient information just to get the case filed, just to get the case in court, sufficient to justify taking custody of the children away from its custodial individual, usually a parent, and place it in some type of protected custody or foster care. Does that respond to your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I know.
All right. The next thing I do is I schedule an appointment to interview the social worker. Now, I don't want you to assume that this is the way you should do it, this is the way you have to do it. This is the way I do it because it makes sense to me. Okay? But this is what I do next. After I have had my initial interview with the director and I've read the initial pleadings in the file, the next thing I do is I go interview the caseworker. Because I want to hear, forgive the term, from the horse's mouth, what's going on and what they think about it. And I ask them straight out, what's your opinion? What's your take on this? Where do you think this is going? Because I want to know what the caseworker's agenda is. You might save yourself hours and hours of reading in that case file if in 5 minutes the caseworker can summarize why that case is here. Unfortunately, because of the thickness of a lot of the caseworkers' files that we are called to work on, it's been a family affair for generations. That's unfortunate. You're not going to find that out simply by reading files for 6 hours. But if a caseworker can describe that to you in 5 minutes, you're a whole lot better off because now you've got a bird's eye view of what's going on. Now, be careful. You're also listening to somebody with an agenda, okay? They have a statutory agenda. They're supposed to work on reunification by statute, okay? But they also may have an attitude about the case based upon the last 10 years of activity. So put your filter ears on and make sure that you're listening not with rose-colored glasses of some sort. But still, you can gain an awful lot of information from the caseworker at that time. Now, what else do you think might be happening if you approach the caseworker and you say, what do you think? And that's one of the first questions out of your mouth. And you're sitting across the table or in front of her desk, and you sit there, whether or not you have a previous relationship, because I understand your turnover of caseworkers is about as awful as ours. So you might have be meeting this person for the first time. You have no idea what their experience is other than you know their caseload is worse than yours. And you ask them, what do you think about this? What's your take on this? What does that communicate?
That you're not going to do your own work and that you just will rely on their opinion. And
maybe.
But you respect them.
Go ahead.
You have respect for their opinion.
Bingo. You have respect for their opinion. Okay? It's about power and control. It's about a relationship. You're not just asking for information. When you present yourself to a caseworker or a parent or a child or a foster parent, particularly in the dependent neglect arena, it's all about power and control. Okay? And if you can convince somebody else that you're not about power and control and you don't have an agenda, you'll get better information. You'll be trusted. You won't be seen as a threat. Okay? So that's why I like to approach caseworkers and attempt to convince them that I'm not a threat to them. It isn't going to work for me to sit down and say, I'm not a threat to you. Okay, fine. But it helps if I say, you know, I really don't know much about this case. What can you tell me? And what do you think about it? Where do you think this case might be heading? You know, you trust them, you're willing to listen, you respect their opinion, you'd like to know their opinion. Okay? That's somebody they might like to work with, that they'd be willing to communicate with. And if your caseworkers are anything like our caseworkers, they're horrible at communication. They're awful. Okay? And it isn't just because of the volume of work they have to do, well, that's reason enough. It's because they work in a difficult arena. People don't tell them the truth very often. And it's a difficult environment. And how refreshing would it be to them if there's somebody else in the process that they can trust? That's how I like to introduce myself. Okay? See, so it isn't just about organizing your file. It's about effective communication skills so that you can gain the information in order to organize your file. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Okay. when I'm looking at a caseworker's file, I usually don't want the whole file. I want pieces and parts of it. I don't know what your style is, but I take a pad of sticky notes with me, and I'll just put sticky notes on the pages or the section of pages with a paper clip that I want to have duplicated. And they make their copy. They send it to me. I will typically make a real brief topical outline in pen and ink notes for myself, just so I can kind of see what's there. Okay, so we've completed that step. Now you have 300 pages of material, or thereabouts. Now what do you do? Okay, so next step. Okay, well, you need to start with the right tools. No different than going to a plumbing job, you don't take electrical tools. No different than going to a carpentry job, you don't take plumbing tools. Okay? You got to have the right tools for the job. So here's what the kinds of tools that we're going to work on. Doesn't show up very good in the light. These are a couple really, really nice lamb chops on the barbecue. Yum, yum. Okay. How many of you like to do outdoor cooking? Most of us. Wonderful. Would you agree with me that outdoor cooking isn't so much about the recipe as it is the technique? Would you agree with me? How hot is the grill? When do you put them on? When do you flip them? When do you pull them off? What kind of special sauce do you put on at the right time? How long should it marinate? Those are the things that you don't find in a recipe book, is it? It's all about technique. Okay? And I love outdoor cooking. And the reason I love it is because it's so much about style, and it isn't so much about which dang sauce you use. Okay? That's why I think it's so much fun. And you know, being organized is the same way. It isn't so much about the tools you use as about how you use them. Okay? One of the tools that you have here is a really fabulous website. Most of the CASA chapters around the state of Montana now have really great websites. This is something that's been fairly new in the last 5 to 10 years. When I started as a CASA volunteer, there were no websites. We had no electronic documents. Everything was in paper. That's why I very, very quickly thought, we got to get this stuff organized. This is a mess. And so now you have the opportunity to get a wealth of documentation off of your own chapter's website, and that's great. So a lot of the documents that we're going to be looking today are available to you off the Missoula CASA website. We are going to go through some of them, but in years past, I used to hand these out, and people would take them home and punch holes in them and put them in their notebook, and now you don't have to. Now you can just pull them off your website. It's great. Okay. Organization. I like this. Pay now or pay later. You're going to spend the time organizing. So you can either spend half as much time organizing if you do it first, or you're going to spend 3 times as much time organizing if you do it later. So what you're going to need, here's your tools. You're going to need a notebook. Now, how many of you at this point in time are pretty much using only electronic files on your computer? Anybody doing that? You're still using pretty much paper? Some of you are. That's okay, because, or even a little bit of both. That's okay. I converted my office to electronic files 5 years ago. It's the best thing since sliced bread. And so I'm paperless now. I don't keep paper files any longer. But I also have the software to back it up to be able to do that, and the front end cost for that was brutal. But now that it's there, it works fairly well. Everything that I'm going to show you today can be done in paper or in electronic files. You can do them both ways. You can do them, you can do it either way, you can do it both ways. So you can have it in paper and on your computer. So totally up to you. But either way, whether it's an electronic notebook or a physical notebook, you're going to need a notebook. Okay? You're going to need, within that notebook, you're going to need a timeline showing your deadlines. Very important to a CASA volunteer. You need to know when your hearing is. You need to know when your report is going to be due, okay? You've got to make sure that you have releases. We'll talk more about that in a minute. I want you to have a relationship tree, family tree. We're going to talk about that, okay? And form letters. If you need to send letters introducing yourself to teachers, physicians, psychologists, caregivers, anybody else in the process, service providers, you'll want a place where you can keep those, okay? There's nothing worse when you're preparing a report 1 to 2 years into a case and you have forgotten what somebody said, you forgot what somebody sent you, you're not sure where you put it. That's what we're going to attempt to cure today. So, before you start gathering your material, before it all goes into a box or a paper sack, you are going to create for yourself a notebook, okay? Any notebook will do. Now, like I say, I'm kicking myself because I didn't bring one. A 3-ring notebook works just fine. Within that notebook, you're going to put a title page on it that's going to look like this, okay? Now, we're going to blow this up and look at it a little more in detail. What I like to use, and this is what I forgot to bring in, what I like to use is a 2-ring notebook because it's faster, okay? Do you remember those 2-hole paper punches for the clipboards that have the 2 rings at the top? Okay, those 2-hole paper punches, if you turn the paper punch sideways and clip the side of the paper, it goes in the notebook sideways, and there's a flip lever, and it's much faster and easier than a 3-ring. You can put stuff in and take stuff out in a fraction of the time as you can a 3-ring. They don't bind up, they don't tear, they just work a lot better. And I apologize, I meant to bring some because I always like to pass some out. I've only got about 200 of them in my office that I have no use for anymore. So it's wonderful if I can send them to a good cause. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to use this system here. This is what I purchased about 25 years ago for a rather spendy little price. It's called Binder Tech. If you look it up on the internet, it's still there. You don't have to because it's free. And you can, it's in a word processing format that you can use, that you can get off your Missoula CASA website. You don't need to buy it from anybody. But here's the cool thing about it. When I bought the software, we were still using floppy disk drives. Okay? So that's how far back it goes. And what we would do with the software is we would use numbered tabs in our notebook. And we could design and plug in our own dividers, so that we didn't have to just go buy them at Staples and write it in pen and ink and then fold up the little tab and stick it in the plastic holder, okay? Now you do it with software and you print it off your own computer, okay? Well, this is a suggested outline which makes sense, I would say, in 70 to 80 to 90% of your CASA cases. Most of it's going to fall into these categories. But the nifty thing about the software, which is now in a Microsoft Word program, you can write your own. So if you want to change what the file dividers look like, if you want to have 36 dividers instead of 10, instead of 15, if you're happy with 8, knock yourself out. Because now you can download and use that file yourself. And we're going to take a look at that right now.
Just an Avery template?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's not going to work, is it?
What, Avery, like A-V-E-R-Y?
Yeah, it's the label. They make the labels and the tabs and all that stuff.
Oh, okay, so you just do a word program thing and then you put in the right thing to print it off and it goes.
It gives you you can type in a category cell if you had.
Okay, here is the Microsoft Word file. And here's what I've put in. New correspondence, my personal notes, contacts, I'll tell you what those are. Schedule and deadlines, very important. Pleadings, you know what those are. Documents from the social workers file, foster care review, visitation time logs. You better be keeping track of when you visit your child, okay? But guess what? Once you make notes of visiting your child and you throw it in your paper sack, where is it, okay? So now you're going to have an actual file divider where you put that, okay? Consents for release. So if you need to get information from a teacher, a doctor, a psychologist, some service provider, you've got a release to be able to do that with. It may not be necessary if your court order provides for that. medical records, psych evaluations, family group decision reports, your own reports, treatment plans, okay? All of the things that you're ever going to want or need as a CASA volunteer, I have already written for you, okay? You can take that existing template, plug it into a notebook, and 99% of the documents you receive are going to fall into one of these categories, okay? So the idea is, as soon as you get a document, you plug it in. It's no different than how we all converted to digital photos from the printed photos. So instead of them sitting in an envelope, and we have 150 envelopes under our bed in boxes, you know, that we've never put into photo albums, and we don't, you know, it's kind of like that cold file in the drawer. You don't want to go there. So now, same thing with digital photos. If you set up files for yourself of where to put them, then as soon as you upload your photos from your camera, it's not so hard to get them into the proper category. The same thing is true here. Once you have this notebook set up, and honestly, people, if you go to Staples and buy yourself those colored dividers, A through B, 1 through 10, 1 through 15, I mean, you're going to spend $5 for a pack of 10 of them. You know, I mean, they're nothing. Okay? So you got them sitting on your shelf. You've got your loose leaf notebook. You hole punch it and plug it in. And now as those documents come in, they all fit right from the very beginning. It's too easy. Okay? And then when you need to go find something later, it's all right there. It's all right there. Now, these same dividers, you can do the same thing by creating electronic files and subfolders in the same category. Okay? And then you just drag and drop. When you get a document emailed to you or you scan it, you just drag and drop it to that electronic file. It works exactly the same way. Okay? All right, now let's see if I can get back to, oh, and again, here, this is a Word file. So you don't like contacts? Type something else. Okay? How easy is that? I mean, it just doesn't get any easier. Okay? You don't even have to go to the internet to find this form anymore, although you can. BinderTech is still a company. You know, you can still find this stuff on the internet. You don't have to. It's on your website. Just download that Word file off your website. You can use it on your own. Okay? Now let's see if I can get back to find my, hey, it works. All right, okay. So there's a little bit larger version. In addition to setting out your, either using the existing dividers or plugging in your own, this software, the Word file, also allows you to put in title information for yourself. So you can call it case number whatever, plug in the child's name. You can plug in primary contact for the caseworker, for your director, for yourself, you know, whatever. There's the little logo for BinderTech. It's still down there. But it's very, very flexible software. And once you download it, just rule of thumb, make sure you save it as a blank template first, then overwrite it and resave it to a particular file. How many of us have blown it when we've altered a document? Oh, I didn't save a blank. Now I got to go find another blank because I screwed up the formatting and I can't possibly figure out how to correct it. One of the things you don't want to do is fuss with any of these tables or the margin settings. It's very sophisticated setup. I can't do it. Don't go there. Just type. Type and leave it. Okay? So there you go. The next thing you want to do is after you've set up your notebook, you have the initial pleadings, you visited with a social worker, you're getting your documents in. The next thing you want to do is you want to set up your calendar and your deadlines. Well, here's another document that I provided to your director some years back, which you should now have on your website. Okay? And Tiffany Lonovic, an attorney who does domestic practice and has helped the CASA program out in Kalispell, she put this form together, and it's strictly based upon the statute and all of the times and deadlines. Now, this one is pretty sophisticated form. It has a lot of stuff in it, and so you want to make sure that you pay very close attention to it. I tend to like a little bit simpler form. Now, the full form is nice because you calendar the entire case forward and all of the statutory deadlines. Okay? So that's good, and you need to do that. But I'm more concerned not what's going to happen 6 months or a year or 2 years from now. I'm more concerned what's going to happen in the next 3 months. Okay? Because I have a narrower focus. I can't think about 2 years from now. I don't know what's going to happen 2 years from now. I want to know about what's the next hearing. When do I have to have a report due? So I wrote this one myself so that I could calendar and fill in the blanks what I have to do for myself for the next few weeks. And that way I'm a little bit more focused than I am 2 years out. So here's another form that you should use and fill out so that you know where you're headed in a particular case. Okay. Releases. Every jurisdiction is different. In Montana, every medical group, legal group, judicial group is different in Montana. In Kalispell, we have had difficulty obtaining documentation sometimes from physicians. I have been told in the past that's usually not an issue. In Missoula, is that still true?
We don't need releases, but our order covers everything.
And by state law, that it's supposed to be that way. There's a statute that says CASA volunteers are supposed to have unfettered access to everything. Well, despite the statute, despite the court order, there are healthcare givers in the Flathead Valley that are a little stingy about it. Well, it's not worth subpoenaing documents and dragging them into court and creating an argument over it. What's easier is just to get people to sign releases. And once you've got a signed release, doctors don't care. It just hasn't become an issue. So I won't spend time on this because it's not an issue in your jurisdiction. Another release form. Okay. So you want to put your notebook together. Again, we can skip the discussion of the releases. Okay, so the next thing you're going to do is you're going to create a relationship tree or diagram. You're going to create what I call 2 lists of contacts and addresses. Okay, so let's talk about these. First one is the relationship tree. We also call these family trees, but you can barely call them families when you're dealing with dependent neglect situations. So I just call them relationship trees. These cases are complicated because in some fashion or another, everyone is either related to somebody else, has screwed somebody else, or is fighting with somebody else. And I'm sorry to be blunt, but this is the world that we're working in, okay? And a lot of people have similar names, same names, partial names, and nicknames. And so you're going to want to know, where do they fit in the picture? Now, this is one of those things that unless you take the time to sit down and diagram it, you will never remember. It's too complicated. Now, some cases are more difficult than others, but most of these cases, they're pretty ding-dang screwy in terms of the people that are involved. And so the best thing you can do is, as soon as you get that caseworker's file, don't start your investigation. Don't start interviewing people. Don't start increasing your documentation in the file until you have a handle on who all these people are. Okay? Now, in pen and ink or in a word processing document, you might want to write down some miniature biographies of some of these people for future reference. Where they work, what their background is, who they love, who they hate, what role they may play in the process. But from one document and one diagram, you need to be able to come back to your notebook someday, 3 months later, 6 months later, 2 years later, and say, wait a minute, who's Fred? Where did Fred come from? And you go back. Anybody read Dr. Zhivago 50 years ago? One of the things they had in Dr. Zhivago, which was great, was they had a list of all the people in the book. Well, it was a good thing. There were 60 characters in the book, and they all changed their names. So you had to keep flipping back to the beginning to find out, who is this? And then trying to understand Russian names and how they change it. Oh, my goodness. This isn't any different. Okay? So you want to make sure that you have graphical representation of who's related to whom, and not necessarily by blood, you know, because some people just lived with somebody, sometimes they were friends, sometimes they were an employer, they lived in his camper for 2 weeks. You don't know, but you can put in some type of diagram. Now, this was one I just happened to pull off the internet. That's in a PowerPoint format. I don't propose that you make it that sophisticated, but it helps to use a big sheet of paper. It helps to use colored pencil and make a rough draft and then a final, and it can even be a fold-out, okay? So that you can take lots of, you're laughing at me. It can even be a fold-out because you might need to come back and add people to it from time to time, and then you kind of tuck it back in into your notebook again. Very, very useful tool. I have even copied my diagram into my court reports because it was so much easier to tell the judge, see Exhibit A, rather than try and explain why these 5 people were interacting with one another and what their relationship was to one another. And so that way the judge can flip back and forth to my diagram just as easily as you do. It makes so much more sense, and it is so much easier once you have this put together.
That's a really good place to... Sometimes CFS hasn't confirmed one way or another whether it's an ICWA case or not. And that was something I came up against in my case, and that tree is a good place to mark.
There you go. That's right. That's a really good point because ICWA changes everything. And one of the things that's important about ICWA, as we all know, is where does it come into play, you know? And what's the degree of kinship? How much blood? Where in the family tree does that occur? And boy, you can answer that real quickly once you identify firmly, you know, where people are from. Good point. You know, really good point. Okay, any other comments on the family tree before we talk about our contact lists? Okay, one of the things that Kristen told me that looks nice, doesn't it? One of the things that Kristen mentioned to me tonight is that your website also contains current contact information for the social worker staff here in Missoula. That's great. How invaluable that is, my goodness. Particularly when there's frequent turnover in staff. Again, we haven't had that in the past, and so I used to always maintain what I called 2 sets of contacts. One was a permanent set, and that contained social workers, care and service providers, all of the various agencies funded by United Way. I mean, there's hundreds of them, and that all have something to do with, you know, housing, employment, therapy, you know, whatever, and a directory for all of them. As well as other CASA volunteers, my program director, all of the CASA staff, my wife. No, I didn't put my wife in there, but anyway, that was my semi-permanent list of contacts so that I had a central location for all of that information. Maybe a little bit less necessary today with your website. Okay. Then my second set of contacts is just for this case. Now, here's another clue. This is when you're first going through the social worker's file. On a separate sheet of paper, I want you to take your legal pad, thank you, and have a separate legal pad, clipboard, notebook, whatever, and at the top you're going to put contacts. Okay? And so as you're going through the social worker's file, every time you come to a name, write it down. Don't skip a page if there's a name on it. Write it down. And then you come 3 or 4 pages, and then you're going to have a summary. I don't know how they organize their files, but you have a summary of notes, and pretty soon you have directories where you have contact information for some of those names. Write it down. Don't leave the office until you have gone through the entire file and written down the name of anybody who is identified in that file and their contact information and some notation as to what their role in the case is. Then you use that to go back and build your relationship tree. Does that make sense? Okay. If you don't do it then, it'll be too late. You'll never be able to figure out who those people are at a later date. And once you're halfway into the case, again, there's nothing worse than having 3 names of people and you don't know who the heck they are. And you have to go back to the social worker, go back to the file, call somebody, and you go, who the heck is this? Oh, well, that's so-and-so. Oh, yeah, right, okay. Nothing worse, nothing worse. So get all of that information up front. It's tedious, it's laborious, but trust me, if you do it right and do it the first time, you'll never have to do it again. Okay? And it's easy then to supplement. As new people come in and old people go out, it's easy to add people and subtract people to that secondary contact list. So the contact list is just for this case. Now, the other thing you're going to find out, how many have been CASA volunteers for more than 5 years? Nobody? Oh, that's right. This is a new bunch. Right-o. Okay. Congratulations. Okay. Trust me, in 5 years, you're going to be well seasoned. Okay. One of the things you're going to find out after you've been a CASA volunteer for 3, 4, or 5 years, you're going to say, that name rings a bell.
Yeah.
You're going to start to see some of these people over and over and over again. Okay. And you're going to come to the realization that all these people are related to each other somehow. They're all causing each other all the same problem all the time. Okay? And without casting any aspersions on any of the people in poverty, you will encounter them on a regular basis. Okay? And so if you have your own little dark book as to who these people are and where they come from, then that can be useful information. Now, word of caution, you have to be very careful with that information, okay? Everything you obtain is obviously outrageously confidential, whether it's on your computer or whether it's in pen and ink or whether it's in your notebook. Now, technically, by the rules, when you conclude a CASA case, your records are shredded and you are not supposed to retain anything. That's by the book, okay? That said, if between you and your director, with their authorization and consent, don't do it on my suggestion, with their authorization and consent, some of this contact information can be very useful for you in the future. Now, if you want to leave that in the CASA office as opposed to your own computer, you work that out with your director, okay?
We ask that they return their files to us. We maintain them for a certain amount of time. So if something does come up again, we'll ask you if you're willing to take the case, which if you are, then we can resurrect that and go on. But we do want the files and ask that. That's why we have the CASA email address to the packages.
Right. And this is also important when you have electronic files because you will need to delete electronic files from your computer. And well, that's a whole other subject. I'm not going to get into that, but you need to delete the electronic files. Okay. So, who's ready to dive in? Are we all excited so far? Everybody? Okay, good. Okay. So, what is your style and your method of communicating with people? What's happening here? Mouse is taking off on itself. How are you going, we've talked about this a little bit already. How are you going to interview the social worker? Okay. How do you go about getting your caseworker file? I'm sure your office has a protocol for that. We all do. Okay. And whatever that protocol is, that's what you utilize. Okay. What do you do when you meet the parents? How do you set that up? How do you have your first encounter and contact with a child? Okay. This is all very critical stuff, and it's very critical in your future work on your file how you start that relationship with somebody. Remember, we talked a little bit about how you start your relationship with a caseworker. It's no less important than with the parent whose child has just been removed, with the foster parents who are now caring for the child, with the child itself, and with all of the other service providers who are involved in the network, even the attorneys who are involved. Okay? I'm a sci-fi buff, okay? And my wife and I would spend all night watching Star Trek reruns if we had nothing else to do in our lives. So now you know the depth of my personality, okay?
Where's Captain?
You know, I saw him on a commercial just the other day, you know, but one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek was called First Contact. And one of the most fascinating things about that particular episode was what a disaster it was because of how the relationship started. It started with a lie, with deception, and lack of trust, and it was a train wreck from then on. Okay? It's a perfect example to how we can ruin the job that we have as a CASA volunteer if we're not very, very cautious about first contact. So, it makes a difference where you have first contact. It makes a difference when you have first contact. And it obviously makes a difference what you say and how you behave. Now, we're getting, what is this thing doing? We're getting, it seems to be. Either that or I'm just bumping it, I'm not sure. It doesn't just depend upon what you say. As my mother always told me, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Okay? And so, because you're the CASA volunteer, and you're the one who's going to keep other individuals out, guess what? You get to choose. It's entirely up to you how you do that. Now, what I was about to say before this thing was taking off on me is I'm wandering a little bit out of my primary topic, which is case organization, and now I'm stepping into the arena of what is actually Chapter 7, effective communication. And actually, this is my favorite topic, because this is the part about a CASA volunteer that makes the most difference to your job, and that's, what do people think of you? How do they trust you? What do they think your role is? And that is going to have more impact on how effective you are as a CASA volunteer than anything else you do. You can be organized. You can write well. You can advocate proficiently. But if nobody trusts you and nobody likes you, you're going to be very ineffective. Okay? So it makes a heck of a difference. So let's take a look at some of this. What I want you to do is to prepare and use your outline, or an outline, for introducing yourself as a CASA volunteer. Now, one of the exercises that is in our program, and I suspect it is in yours also, as part of your clinical training, is how do you introduce yourself as a CASA volunteer? And whether you break up into groups of 2 or 3 or whatever, you practice introducing yourself. Okay? What I want you to do is not just practice it verbally, but actually write what we call in public speaking a canned speech, a memorized speech that you pretty much follow every time when you introduce yourself, depending upon which arena you're in. I don't suggest you use the same speech with a caseworker as you do with the parent, obviously, but the best way is for you to not wing it. Okay? Now, that's not to say you should be oblivious to the person's feelings and circumstances that are in front of you. If they're screaming at you or sobbing or doing something else, I expect you need to react to that. Okay? At that point, your little memorized speech may not mean a lot. Okay? But I want you to be really comfortable with who you are. So that's why I want you to go back home, go to your computer, and start writing out your letter of introduction. Not his, not hers, yours. Who you are. What do you think a CASA volunteer is? How would you introduce yourself? Okay? And get really comfortable with that. Okay? We talked about time, place, and arena. Let's hear from some of you as to where, when, and how you might want to do first introduction to the biological parent whose child has just been removed. What do you think about that? Where would you go? A neutral location. Other ideas?
What about their place?
Their home?
Give them a little more feeling of security, I guess, or
Okay.
confidence.
Okay. Other ideas?
Plus you can see their house.
I have no idea.
No idea.
Would it be fair to take them out for a cup of coffee, or?
Take them out for a cup of coffee?
Yeah.
Okay. I like the concept of a neutral location. These people feel threatened. They have just had a child removed from their home. They probably don't understand why. They most certainly don't agree with it. It very likely has something to do with their home, and they may not be especially proud of it at that point in the case. I don't want to put pressure on them about their home. I may very well need to go look at the home at some point in time, but I don't want to do that fresh out of the chute. Okay? That's my personal opinion. I'm not going to argue with somebody that wants to try that, but I personally like the neutral location. I like taking somebody out for a cup of coffee. Okay? Pardon me. So, go ahead.
Many times, the parents' lawyers like to be present. So that protocol with us is when you're making that first contact in particular, you let the attorney know that you need to meet with the parent. And oftentimes, if not every first time, they want to be there with you. And if that's not the case, that's fine. Then you wend your way. And another way might be like, sometimes you go with the social worker, but many times that first meeting, because the relationship with the caseworker and the parent is many times, just as Randy was saying, is kind of
Acrimonious.
Acrimonious. But if you go with their lawyer, they trust the lawyer most times. That's a good way to protocol to follow.
The presence of the lawyer obviously changes the dynamics of the situation a great deal. Here is my suggestion. Pretend the lawyer isn't there. I mean that. Now, that doesn't mean ignore the lawyer or be disrespectful, but act as though the attorney isn't there. You're not there to communicate with the attorney. You're there to communicate with the parent. So when you're talking to the parent, don't look at the lawyer. Look at the person you're talking to. Okay? And I'm not suggesting any kind of sneakiness or subterfuge, but here are some other techniques I enjoy using because I think they're effective. I dress down. I don't wear these clothes. I'll put on a flannel shirt, a pair of jeans, some sneakers. I will try and schedule the meeting right around lunchtime or a little bit after. I will show up and offer to buy a cup of coffee, a cup of tea. We'll have a dialogue, and we'll talk about the dialogue in a minute. We'll have a dialogue, and maybe half hour, 45 minutes into it, I'll say, you know, I didn't get anything to eat this morning. I'm going to have a piece of pie. Would you like something? You buy them a cup of soup or a piece of pie, it might be the only thing they ate that day. You're not buying their loyalty. You're buying a relationship. Okay? And all you're doing is being nice. And all you want to do is listen to them talk. Don't take notes. Don't take a pen and paper. Just listen. Listen to what they have to say. Ask them a couple questions about themselves, about their children, about where they're from. You do need to tell them what a CASA volunteer is. That's part of your job. That's not a problem. Okay? You don't have to tell them everything in the first meeting. You just tell them basically what a CASA volunteer is. You're going to have a sense and a feeling with a sense of tension, awkwardness, after a while, when the conversation is kind of over. Okay? Now, I don't usually try and get into the nitty-gritty of the case in the first meeting. I just want them to know who I am. I just want them to be comfortable with who I am. Okay? And then I say, you know, could we talk again sometime? On another day, I'm going to need to ask a few questions, you know, about the case, and obviously you know a great deal more about this than I do, and I'd just like to learn a little bit more about that. Would that be okay? And what would be the best place for us to meet? You ask them. And they're probably going to say, well, here works. Or you can come over. I've never had any of them invite me to their home, not once. If they do, great. You know, that's fine. But you know, most of their homes aren't going to be anything they're going to be particularly impressed with. They probably won't invite you to their home. In fact, their home may well be one of the reasons why their child was taken away.
In fact, they may not have one.
They may not have a home. They may be living out of a car. Okay, and that's the other thing, particularly in Missoula. It's somewhat true in Kalispell, and that is, if I can get a hold of them by phone or arrange it through their attorney, I will ask them to suggest a place that's close to where they are. So they don't have any humiliation over having to walk to where we're going to meet, because they may not have a car. So your job, make it as easy as you can for them, as unintimidating as possible as it can be. Okay? Okay. Now, let's say we're doing a second meeting with biological parent. So we've had our meet and greet, we've had our introductions, now you need to start asking questions. Okay? And, well, you have to. You have to just start asking the hard questions. But you can say that. You say, you know, I've got to figure out what happened, so I have to start asking the hard questions. So I hope you don't mind. It's nothing personal, but I got to ask some of this stuff, if that's okay. And most of them are eager to tell their story. Now, it might come from their point of view, but they're eager to tell you their story. I will let them talk for a while, and then I'll say, well, now, wait a minute, you said this, what about that part? And then they'll explain it again. You say, you know, my memory is so lousy, would it be okay if I wrote some of this down? Okay? That's a whole lot less intimidating to approach it that way than to sit down with a pencil and paper just as soon as you sit down, because now they think they're being recorded. Okay? Whole difference. See how much difference it makes? Just a little bit different technique, and you can be someone's friend as opposed to their suspected enemy. Okay? Now, the other side of that coin, you got to be careful. You don't want to be too friendly with them, or they will get the impression that you are their advocate. You have to be careful of that also. Okay? I do not know anything about what the public defender style, status, or protocol is in Missoula. I know what it's like in Kalispell. In Kalispell, if these people ever see, much less speak to their attorney, it's a minor miracle. They don't have much of a relationship with them. We almost never are required to have an attorney present when we meet with biological parents, because the attorneys don't much care. I'm sorry that's the case, but it typically is. Okay. Okay. Different community, different environment, and that's fine. You deal with it as you have to, you know. And so if the attorney's present, the attorney's present, you may not have to do quite so much song and dance to endear yourself to someone if the attorney's present, just to get information. You just ask your questions. The other reason, the other thing that changes, if an attorney is present, you don't much need to worry about the biological parent falling under the misapprehension that you somehow represent them. That won't occur if they have their own attorney. But those are some things just to be cautious of in the dynamics of the process. Okay? One of the things you always have to inform biological parents is that you're going to be writing a report and recommendations to the court based upon what you're told and what you observe. Okay? Forget about the last item with the releases, because you know you have that covered. Okay? Let's talk a little bit more about communication style. Okay, the biological parent isn't the only person that we're going to be interviewing. We've talked about the social worker, we've talked about the biological parent. I've seldom had issues talking to foster parents, and they actually have a fairly limited role in the amount of information they provide you, although it's worth visiting with them, of course. But the other biggie is the child. Okay, we gotta have to go visit with the child. Just the way the chips have fallen, all of the children who I have assisted as a CASA volunteer have been very young, as in under 5, 6, 7 years of age. And well, that changes the dynamics of a case a great deal. If you're not working with teenagers and you're working with very, very young children, your whole approach to communicating with the kids obviously is drastically different. I'm not sure I have a lot of suggestions for talking to teenagers. Does anyone? But
Take them lunch.
take them lunch.
Take 'em lunch.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. But when you're dealing with, extraordinarily young children, obviously there's a limited amount of technical, direct questioning and information you can ask for. It's simply more important that you have a relationship with them. And even up to 7, 8, 9 years of age, I have a couple recommendations. I mean, we could play some role-playing games here that would be fun, but there isn't time. I have a couple recommendations for you. First of all, follow the foster care's guidance and suggestions of when and where to talk. They know more about the child than you do, okay? And particularly if there are some trauma issues involved, they will have been dealing with it for a while, and they'll know what time of day, what day, and under what circumstances would be best. And I will follow their lead. The last thing I'm going to do is get on the wrong side of foster parents in my case. So I'm not going to do that. Then we schedule the time. In some cases, I have been made aware that foster parents become territorial and an issue, but I have not personally had that problem, and I don't think most CASA have. But so I'm going to assume that's not going to be an issue. So knock on the door, meet and greet the foster parent. Foster parent introduces me to the child, and let's assume we're dealing with a child under 8 years of age. What do you do?
Get on the floor.
Wonderful suggestion. Get on the floor. Okay? How is power and control defined? By social distance. Okay? Would you mind doing a little demonstration for me here? Just stand up. Okay? You all know this without verbalizing it, but let me demonstrate the importance of social distance. Acceptable social distance in Western culture, arm's length. Okay? This is acceptable. If we are friends, strangers, just met, or whatever, this is an acceptable distance for us to speak to one another. This is not. What's your immediate reaction?
Backed out.
Yeah, okay? That's us, okay? That's humans. Kids are the same way, okay? They understand things exactly the same way as adults do when it comes to acceptable social distances. In nonverbal communication, we call it spatial behavior. If you ever look at birds on a wire, they're mostly equidistant from one another. That's called spatial distance, okay? And it's very important in nonverbal communication because it communicates all kinds of things. So the first thing we're going to do is communicate a social distance that represents no threat, and we're going to communicate a power and control relationship that represents no threat. That means you're on the floor. So dress comfy. You're going to ask real important questions. What's your favorite TV show? What's your favorite character? What kind of games do you like to play? Do you have a toy you could show me? What's your dog's name? You know, these are the kinds of things you're going to ask them about. And you'll be amazed how social and conversant they typically are. In some occasions, after an hour, I've had kids climbing over me. It just depends, you know, on what their background and circumstances have been. Sometimes their behavior is inappropriately affectionate, depending upon what difficult trauma they've experienced. The first time that happened to me was kind of an eye-opening experience. So you really need to be prepared for anything. But the important thing is, don't go there with huge expectations for young children. Your goal is to simply see the child, visit with a child, have a relationship with a child. For whatever reason, I would say the bulk of the CASA volunteers in Kalispell are retired people. These people become essentially adopted grandparents to these young kids, where they develop strong bonds that last beyond their appointment in a case. It's pretty interesting to see. I have not had that personal experience. I haven't had the time for it, for one thing. But some of these people just develop incredible relationships with these young kids and do all kinds of things with them within the bounds of protocol as a CASA volunteer. They really find those relationships really, really special. Now, if it's possible for you to obtain technical information from a child, then you should, because that's part of your investigation. Obviously, you're going to be very careful about how and when you do that. And I don't have the best suggestions for you under those circumstances, other than just obviously be very, very careful. You want to have private time with your child, the foster parent. I mean, if they're in the kitchen and you're in the living room, that's fine. But they shouldn't be hovering over your shoulder. And you should be able to have, you know, adequate time with them. Frequently, I've had the child want to take me to their bedroom and show me their toys and their games and their pictures. And sometimes we'll color together, play a game of cards together, and I've never once taken notes. Sometimes I race to my notebook as soon as I get back to my car, or pull out my dictaphone and try and get stuff down before I forget it. But I just try and make it, you know, quality time with the child. And I think you'll be surprised at what you learn when you don't ask the questions, because they will frequently volunteer an awful lot of information, and you'll find that you don't oftentimes have to ask questions. So I put this slide up because it's one of my favorites. Why do we have 2 ears and 1 mouth? And that is because we are supposed to listen twice as much as we're supposed to talk. And so that's just my little pitch with that. It is also essential that we hear the nonverbal messages, the silent messages that are going on. You don't have to play psychologist. You don't have to have skills or training in nonverbal communication. Doesn't hurt if you do. But be sensitive to what we call paradoxical communication. When an individual is saying one thing, but the vibes they're sending you are something totally different. That's just something to be very aware of. And again, it's not for us to analyze, it's just something to be sensitive to. Okay? Always make sure you hear the silent message. Again, in Kalispell, we use the CASA volunteer notebook for training. And in the training manual, there is a section on communication and communication styles. Let me just get all of these up. Okay. There are 5 styles that they talk about, and then they have this little chart about how they all come together. And you don't need to memorize these, but it's helpful to be aware of them. There's the competitive, the direct style, the confrontational style. There's the avoidant style. Any of you think of a perfect example of a real common catchphrase that we use now if we are wanting to avoid a discussion or an argument with somebody? Whatever. 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 That's the avoidant style, okay? Then there's the accommodative style, which is, well, whatever you'd like, you know. The compromising style, well, I'll tell you what, I'll do that if you'll do this, you know. There's the collaborative style. This is the one we're supposed to use as a CASA volunteer, and that's to visit with all parties and find out what everybody's goals and agendas are, and try and help people express those and synthesize those together. It's really what mediation is all about. Okay? So I ask the question, why is style relevant? Why does it make a difference? Does it make a difference? And it makes a difference how we communicate. What's important about each of these styles is if I had you take out a slip of paper and write down your predominant style out of one of these, you'd probably write one or two or a combination of several down and say, that's me. That's, if somebody asked my wife, my child, my friends, what I'm like, it would probably be this. Now, I've spoken with you long enough, and I'm not going to ask you. You could probably pick out what my style is here. Okay? But here's the unique thing. Because we're human, and because we're intelligent, and because somebody gave us the tricks in the book, guess what we can do? We can change our style. So when I normally talk really loud, I can choose to talk really soft. When I normally talk pretty fast, I can choose to slow down my rate of speech. And you see, it changes who I am. We can change our style. And that's useful when we're communicating with people in such a difficult arena as dependent and neglect. Because there's going to be times when each of these styles is appropriate depending upon the arena into which we're being placed. What I want you to do as a CASA volunteer is to think about that ahead of time and beware that no matter what your native style is, don't fall into the trap of just using your native style. Remember the tools in the toolbox that you have available to you, okay? If you can remember that, you will be a more effective CASA volunteer, okay? Listening for meaning, that's what we want to do. We want to listen for that subtext and know what's going on. So, use one set of ears for receiving the message that is spoken. What are the words? What words am I saying? What words am I using? Okay? One for the message that's being conveyed silently. Okay? The nonverbal. And one for receiving the feelings of the sender. What's the emotional affect of what's going on? Be sensitive to all three of these messages that you're getting. Okay? And it's okay when you're taking notes, to take notes on all three. Child is saying this, but is obviously very agitated. Parent is telling me this, but she's in tears. What does that tell you about what's going on? Okay? Some factors to include when you're taking notes. Most of these are common sense. But when you're to the stage where you're interviewing somebody and you can and you should be taking notes and you got your pencil and your paper out in front of you, this is a little outline that is handy to have with you. First of all, when and where is it taking place? You want to have a record of that. Okay? It can make a difference later, a year or two later, you go back and you look at what that person said, but you don't remember where they interviewed them, and they said something very different. At a later interview, it might have had something to do not just with the date, but where you were. Okay? Dynamics. Communication is a very fundamentally changing thing. So write down where you were and what the circumstances were, because a year later you won't remember. Okay? Very important. What is that individual's relationship to the child? You should record that in your notes. Now, here's where it gets critical, because this is critical for your report writing later. What did you see? Now, what did you think? What did you see? There is a difference. Write down what you observed. Okay? Then write down what were the feelings that were expressed. Remember the three parts of listening. What did they say? What were the feelings expressed? Write down the factual narration of what they told you. What happened? What happened next? What happened after that? What happened after that? Okay? write down the plan of action by that individual. What do you plan to do about this? What are your goals? What do you think should happen? Now, whether you're talking to the caseworker, the parent, probably not the child, although you can certainly ask the child, what would you like out of this? What are your goals? You can do that, okay? Or a psychologist. You can ask, what are your goals? Okay? Then, after you have written these notes down and you go back home and you're reviewing your notes, help yourself, do yourself a favor, and give yourself an agenda item for what you should do next. What's your next step in this case to carry your investigation and your report and your role as a CASA volunteer forward? It's going to be clear to you right after one interview who you should talk to next. But you wait 2 days, you're going to forget. So write it down right away. Synthesize your notes and decide what your goal and agenda is to do next. What else do you need to find out in order to get the whole picture? Okay? And then tentative decisions or decisions. My impressions thus far are X. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean you're prejudicing yourself from what you might conclude at a later date. These are just your initial thoughts and impressions. Okay? All of this is to help you from letting your case get cold, so that you can come back to it a week later and say, oh, that's what I was thinking. This is where I want to head next. Okay? So you're not going to work on this case every day. There may be a time when 2 weeks goes by because you're in Hawaii, you're on a job, you're visiting relatives, some other train wreck in your life happens and you have to deal with it. 2 or 3 weeks comes by, you come back to your CASA case, now what am I supposed to be doing? If you make these notes and you've got this in red, you know exactly what you have to do next. Oh, okay. Sometimes you got to just put yourself on autopilot and say, well, this is what I said I was going to do. I guess this is what I'm going to do, even if you're not entirely sure why. Okay? So here's some interview follow-up ideas for you. After you have taken notes from an interview, you go home, you go to your computer, your laptop, and you rewrite your notes. Why? Why should you do that? 2 reasons. Number 1, jog your memory for other things you might want to do. And let's go back to this slide. Remember, your plan of action and your decisions, okay? That's what's going to help you come to that, is if you go back and retype your notes, okay? Because now you can start to synthesize it and say, oh yeah, okay. Okay, any other reasons?
It'll be more organized.
Be more organized, it's easier to read. Other ideas, that's part of your agenda, absolutely. Any other ideas? Okay, here's an important one. And as you gain experience in the CASA field with testifying in court, and if you have sharp defense attorneys, this is critical. Anything you write down as a CASA volunteer is what we call discoverable. It can be subpoenaed. Okay? You may very well have something in your handwritten notes that you would prefer not to be quoted on at a later date. Okay? That's why you retype your notes, because you're going to sanitize them, so that if and when they are subpoenaed, there's not going to be anything in them that you're not going to have a good explanation for if you're asked to testify on a witness stand. Now, that doesn't mean you're hiding facts. It doesn't mean you're being deceptive. It doesn't mean you're misrepresenting anything. It means you're synthesizing that interview into what you deem to be important as a CASA volunteer. That's legitimate. That's our job. Okay?
Do we preserve our handwritten notes then, or trash?
No.
Yeah.
You destroy them.
There's no prohibition against that?
None. None. And if you're asked on a witness stand, what did you do with your original notes? I retyped them and I threw the originals away. End of discussion. And nobody's going to be suspicious because of that, because everybody retypes notes from time to time. Not a problem. Not a problem. Okay? You also want to keep a log of your activity. And again, that goes back to these notes. Okay? There's a log of what you did. If you record all this information, then you have a log. Okay? So, if you want to keep a separate log of your activity, just by date and calendar and summary, interviewed child, interviewed teacher, interviewed biological parent, and that's all that the log contains, other than 5 minutes, 25 minutes, whatever. That's fine. You want to keep a log of that activity. Why do you do that? Obvious reason.
Contacts in your court report.
Okay, sure. That's important. Why else?
Tara told us to.
To keep track of the hours that we spend.
You got to keep track of your hours. You have to report your hours, for what you do. And if you write it down right away and you have a log, then you can fill out your timesheets and get it inserted. Now, Dennis, do you guys have an Excel spreadsheet or something that you use here?
Well, we do, but these guys don't.
Okay.
Except they just report number of hours.
Okay. But you do have to turn in your hours. What's another reason?
For me, it shows, I actually have the type of job where I do keep track of my time. And a lot of times I can go back and I can look at where the holes are.
Sure.
Believe it or not,
Great idea.
it's kind of like, I can see holes and I can see, plus not only do we have to keep track of our hours, but we have a job to do. We have responsibilities, like we're supposed to talk to the kid and we're supposed to do this and we're supposed to do that. And that would be an easy way to look at it and make sure that we, checked off the major players.
Yep. Okay. What's our ultimate job here, folks?
I think it adds to our credibility.
Bingo! Bingo. You're on a witness stand. Defense counsel is examining you and saying, all right, now just what the heck did you do on this case? Well, on this date I did this, on this date I did that. What? No, I don't want to know that. Well, that's what you asked me, counsel. Now I have a record here of everything I did. Do you want me to tell you or not? And now I'm being cute, and you don't have to. Obviously, you're not going to do that. But boy, does that add to your credibility when you've got this nice notebook and you flip it open and there's a log of everything you did on every day that you did it, recorded. Impressive. Who gets the vote for the credibility in the case? You do. Okay? How hard is it to do that? Easy. Piece of cake. Write it down. Okay? And as she noted, it gives you a bird's eye view of everything that you've done so that you can see if there's gaps or holes. You look back and 2 months have gone by and you haven't visited the child. Uh-oh. Problem. Okay? Or you look back and you visited with the biological parent this many times, but not this person, not that person, and not this person. A little slanted here. I think I better go interview some other people. Maybe. It depends on the case. But yeah, gives you that.
Log is what we have to submit in our document to the court, to the judge.
We're coming to that.
It's the contacts
That's right.
that you've made.
That's right. This is one of the statistical portions of your written report you have to put in. How many contacts? How many hours? How many times? Yes? Yeah, we're getting close. We're getting close. I got a lot of material here, so we're going to... Okay. The point of this is begin with the end in mind. One of the best how-to books ever written was The 7 Habits of a Highly Successful Professional. Awesome book. It's pretty old, but you can get copies of it. It's a wonderful book. And one of the things he argues is begin with the end in mind. So that if you know that your ultimate end game is a written report to the court, and you know what the format of that report is, then that's how you want to gather your information up front and record it so that writing your report becomes a piece of cake. Becomes very, very easy. Okay. Let's skip to... really, that's most of what I have in the balance of my outline talks about, here's a good one, talks about how to synthesize material for your report. And I know that's a chapter that you cover elsewhere, so I don't need to spend a lot of time on that. I mean, we could have some fun, but it isn't essential. This is something else I teach in communication circles. I call them false gods. Okay? Here is one of the first false gods. Huh? Try again. I have been perfectly clear. Okay? Based upon what I have written in this report, there is just no question about what I intend, what I think, and what I'm suggesting here. Okay? Well, that's why we have our director read our report and hand it back to us with a lot of red marks. Okay? Because we aren't always perfectly clear. The next one is everyone knows exactly where I stand. Now, you will develop your own style as a CASA volunteer based upon your personality, your work ethic, your values, and that's important. You should. Okay? But one of the styles I like to promote for myself is not only am I going to be honest and upfront with people, I will never surprise anyone. I'm not going to be a snake in the grass. That's why, and it's not only required, but that's why I will tell the biological parent at some point in time I'm going to be writing a report to the court based upon what I see. You will get a copy of that report. You might not like some of what I write, but I have to write on behalf of the best interest of the child. That's what I'm supposed to do. Okay? So you really ought to be proud of me that I'm looking out for what I think is going to be best for your child. Okay? And so I try and soften that blow a little bit, but I'm not going to be sneaky about it. I try and play the same way with the social worker and the caseworker. Even if the caseworker and I ultimately disagree on some point or even the outcome in a case, I don't want them to be mystified by where I'm coming from. And so I will routinely drop emails to the caseworker, never expecting a response, but drop routine emails to the caseworker. Visited with the child today, had a nice visit. They were concerned about X. I think he needs a pair of pants, you know. And visited with, you know, biological parents. She's really concerned about X, you know. And maybe I think this, you know, or my preliminary attitude might be X, you know, and can we go to lunch and talk about this? And I never want to be a mystery to the people that I work with. Now, I'm a pretty verbal person anyway. I'm not a very quiet or secretive type of person. So that's not my problem to begin with. But that said, I still like the other people, whether I'm litigating a really, really tough case or whether I'm working on a CASA case, I like other people to know where I'm coming from so that I'm not mistrusted, distrusted, or a mystery. I think that's really important. Your style is your own, but that's something that I think is important. And the last one is I will never be misunderstood. I think I speak pretty clearly, but it's amazing how many times people misunderstand what I thought I said. So get over it and get used to the fact that I may think I said something here tonight, and you're going to go tell somebody that I said something, and I'm going to hear it, and I'm going to go, huh? I said what? I don't think I said that. Welcome to reality, because that's how people work. That's pretty normal. Okay, let's wrap up. Okay, here's my last slide. CASA work is one of the hardest jobs you're ever going to do. But of all of the jobs, you will eventually be rewarded, perhaps not with the outcome that you might think would be desirable in a particular case. But one of the things that's important that you will always recognize is that you will know that you made a difference in the life of a child. And what can be a better job than that? So, thank you for listening. Thank you very much. And I hope I can come and share with you again sometime.